In this video, we're going to briefly touch on what the state pension is, how much you get, and when it's payable. I'll then try and answer, is it enough to retire on? And if not, what kind of defined contribution pension would I need to make up the difference? So let's get into it. The state pension is essentially a pension payable by the government as and when you reach a certain age. It's payable for life, regardless of how long you live for. The state pension also has protection against inflation, eroding it as it increases each year by something called the triple lock. It's called this because the state pension increases each year by the higher of inflation, average increase in earnings across the UK, or just simply 2.5%. The state pension age is currently 66, however, it is set to rise to 67 before increasing to 68. Who knows, but it's possible the state pension age could increase further, or the amount could be reduced or even means tested as a result of an ageing population and the strain this will put on public finances, although it must be said this would be political suicide and very unpopular. This video will focus on the new state pension. You can read around the old state pension in the description as the rules are slightly different. We're going to assume someone receives the full state pension for the sake of brevity, but it's easy enough to check your own entitlement online, and I'll leave a link again in the comments for you to do so. The full state pension for the 22-23 tax year is currently £203 per week. This equates to an annual income of around £10,600. The short answer is, it's going to depend. This will be based on various factors such as your lifestyle, spending habits, and your other retirement income. If retirement is so far away, or you want a guide estimating how much you think you're going to need, the Retirement Living Standards carry out a survey which looks at what, on average, a UK retiree would need for a minimum, moderate and a comfortable retirement here in the UK. To answer the question of, is the state pension enough, and if not, what defined contribution pension would you need to meet the shortfall amount? We're going to run a fictional case study for 3 individuals who we've looked at in other videos, John, Karen and good old Terence, who, coincidentally enough, each of them need a retirement income for each of the 3 retirements respectively. We'll assume they are single for simplicity, but remember, if you have a spouse or partner and you split the bills, you should always consider your retirement planning together, as it's likely you're going to pool your assets and incomes in retirement. Turning to the cash flow, let's explain what some of this means. So we can see these red bars here. This indicates that there is a shortfall in John's income and expenditure. And you'd expect this because if you remember, his only form of income is a state pension at £10,600. He needs the minimum standard of living in retirement according to the RLS of £12,800. And so there's a shortfall from the outset of £2,200. This is why this red deficit increases each year. Starting with some of the assumptions, though, that we've used, we have assumed inflation is 3%, and we've set it so that their expenses increase by this amount each year, and we've set it so John's life expectancy and the rest of the life expectancies are age 90. We've set it so the expenses at age 75 reduced by 10% as quite naturally their spending decreases, wanes, as they can't do the things that they used to do. You could say 10% isn't enough, maybe so, but it's always better to err on the side of caution with these things. The drawdown part, the pension part that's going to be used to meet that deficit or shortfall amount, we're going to assume that that is invested and grows by 4% a year. So just turning back to John's example of the cash flow here, and we can see this deficit indicated by the red line. Using this crafty piece of kit, we can calculate what is going to be needed to kind of address that shortfall to ensure that he doesn't run out of money during his lifetime. So, hitting this button, we can see that John is going to need a pension pot in the region of £34,000. If we then look at the cash flow, we can see that there is no red line, and at age 90, he's still got about just under just over £1,000, and he's effectively not run out of money, which is good news. Turning now to Karen's example, and she needed a income of £23,300. Again, her only form of income was her state pension, so this left a deficit of £12,700. As you can see, compared to John's case, the red charts indicating this deficit are much larger, and you'd naturally expect that because she needs more income. Again, what we're going to do now is use our tool to estimate what kind of pension fund she'd need from the outset to address this deficit and hopefully ensure that she doesn't run out of money during her lifetime. Okay, so we can see that Karen is going to need a pension fund in the region of £268,500. As you can see now in the cash flow, there is no red which would suggest that she's not going to run out of money, which is good news. Finally, we're going to turn to Terence's example, and he wanted the most comfortable retirement possible. He wanted £37,300. His only form of income was his state pension of just over £10,500, so there's a shortfall each year of £26,700 that he's going to need to find from somewhere, and in this case, it's going to be a private pension. He's got no other form of assets or any other pensions elsewhere. So we can see the red chart, which indicates the deficit amount is much more pronounced than the other two examples. So Terence would need a private pension from the outset at 66 of around £583,000. As we turn to the modeler once again, we can see that there's no red which would suggest there isn't going to be a shortfall. And at the end of his life, there's around £25,000, give or take, at his pension at the end of his lifetime. So let's turn to Karen's example from earlier, and we know that she needed a income of, £23,300. Her only other form of income is going to be a state pension at age 66. But unlike the other example, we've set it so that she retires at age 63. There's effectively 3 years before her state pension that she's going to need to plug this income from her private pension. We can see that there's a much bigger deficit than in the example of when she retired at 66. So using our tool, let's see what she's going to need to address this shortfall at age 63. There we go. We can see that Karen would need to address this shortfall a pension of £337,000 at age 63, which is significantly more than what would have been needed at age 66. And if we turn to the cash flow, as we can see, there's no red, which would indicate a shortfall up to her life expectancy of age 90. Now, I appreciate you won't have access to this software at home, but for those of you that way inclined, you may be able to do this in Excel. If that fills you with dread or sounds like too much hard work, you can use a rule of thumb to try and estimate what you'd need to meet that shortfall amount. And one of these rule of thumbs is the 4% rule. The 4% rule originated from a 1994 US study. It found that if you were invested in a balanced portfolio made up of 60% stocks and 40% bonds, and withdrew 4% of your pension each year over retirement of 30 years or less, and this was between 1930 to 1970, then historically at least, you wouldn't have exhausted your retirement savings. This is often described as a sustainable withdrawal rate. To calculate how much you would need using the 4% rule, simply take the shortfall amount and divide it by 4%. So looking at the example for a minimum retirement, this would mean you'd need a private pension of £55,000, and so on and so forth. Coincidentally, the amounts from either the cash flow modelling scenario or the 4% rule produce relatively similar numbers by and large. Some would argue that 4% is too high, or if you were naturally a bit more cautious and wanted to bake in some security, you could adopt a low withdrawal rate. However, the effect of this would mean you'd need to save more in your pension as you're effectively taking a lower amount due to the lower percentage. For example, if you used a low withdrawal rate of 3% for the shortfall amount of £12,700, you would need an additional £105,000 saved in your pension. It's worth highlighting that a cash flow forecast is going to be wrong almost immediately. Using the 4% rule blindly as well isn't going to mean you won't run out of money in retirement. I'd always recommend at least annually rerunning the cash flow or just revisiting your position in general, as the sustainability of your pension will depend on things that are impossible to control, such as growth rate, your changing expenses, life expectancy, and when you retire. If returns are a lot lower or you live a lot longer, this may make cash flow worthless, which is why I believe this exercise should be repeatedly carried out. If you enjoyed this video, watch my other video that I looked at, which considered how much income a £100,000 pension may be able to generate in retirement from both Flexi Access Drawdown or an annuity.